Welcome, the anointed ones. Patterns don't lie, people do. Chosen ones. Tonight, we're diving into something that has your enemies shaking their heads, replaying conversations in their minds, and whispering to each other, "How did they know?" Because let's be real, you called their moves before they even thought them through. What they thought was a secret playbook was so predictable to you that it felt like rewatching a rerun of a show you'd already seen. Here's the fact. Psychologists have long proven that human behavior is 90% repetitive. Most people aren't as unpredictable as they think. They're running on loops, triggered by the same fears, fueled by the same desires, and blinded by the same arrogance. That means if you're awake, you don't need a crystal ball to know what's coming. You just need eyes sharp enough to catch the patterns. And your eyes, razor sharp. Your enemies are sitting there baffled, thinking you've got hidden cameras, secret informants, or maybe even some government-level intel. The truth? You simply learned how to see what they can't hide, their intent. Their little plots were like a poorly directed movie, predictable ending, weak storyline, and way too many unnecessary sequels. Honestly, the only thing shocking is that they really believed they were unpredictable. So buckle up, because we're about to break down how you saw every twist before it unfolded, why their own habits betrayed them, and how you left them gasping for air like characters stuck in a script you already memorized. Number 1, you didn't predict them. You remembered them. What looked like psychic ability to others was really your memory working on a level they don't even understand. You weren't sitting there making wild guesses or playing detective with scraps of information. Deep down, you'd already seen these patterns before. People think life is random, but it's not. Certain kinds of manipulation, betrayal, and envy always show up wearing the same clothes, just different faces. The gestures change, the voices change, but the blueprint underneath is identical. Your soul picked up on that. It's like a song you heard a long time ago. You don't consciously remember the lyrics, but when the music starts playing, the words come back to you. That's what happened when you predicted their moves. This isn't about mysticism or fortune-telling. It's about recognition. People who live in cycles of deceit think they're inventing something new every time they try it. They're not. Their tactics are ancient, tired, and worn out. Your awareness made it look like you had a secret advantage, but really, you just weren't blinded by the performance. You saw the repeat pattern of behaviors, the fake kindness before the favor, the shift in tone before the lie, the sudden distance before betrayal. Most people ignore these signs because they want to believe the best, but you've lived through enough to know that patterns rarely break without effort. Your gift is that you don't just see the surface, you register the rhythm beneath it. Even their pauses and hesitations spoke volumes to you. You could feel when someone's help had strings attached, when someone's apology was really a setup for another hit. That isn't paranoia, it's pattern literacy. And the more you lived, the sharper it became. This is why it looks like you're 5 steps ahead. Because you're not reacting to what's happening now, you're remembering what always happens next. To them, it's scary. They can't understand how you read them so easily, but they're the ones who made themselves readable. They follow the same script every time because that's all they know. You're not a mind reader, you're a cycle breaker. While they recycle their old habits, you've evolved beyond them, and that's why you always know their next move before they make it. Number 2, their strategies were never original. The truth is, most of the strategies people use against others aren't as clever as they think. They're not inventing anything new. They're just recycling the same tired tricks that insecure people have been using for generations. Jealousy, manipulation, gaslighting, sabotage, all of it follows a formula. It might look different on the surface, with different faces and words, But underneath, it's the same old blueprint. That's why you could see it coming from a mile away. You weren't decoding some mystery. You were recognizing a pattern that has been around forever. People who thrive on control believe their plans are original because they're wrapped up in their own ego. They think, nobody's ever thought of this before. But you've lived through the phases of false promises, backhanded compliments, setups disguised as opportunities, and attacks disguised as concern. You've seen these tactics fail over and over, so when someone tried to run the same game on you, it lit up like a flashing neon sign. It wasn't a surprise, it was déjà vu. Your insight into their moves didn't come from suspicion or paranoia, it came from experience and clarity. The more someone repeats a pattern, the more predictable they become. And because most people aren't willing to grow or change, they use the same behaviors over and over without even realizing it. That makes them loud without saying a word. Their strategies are like fingerprints. They always leave a trace. What really unsettles them is that you don't just recognize their tactics. You understand the motivation behind them. You see the insecurity fueling the manipulation. You see the fear behind the control. That gives you an advantage, because while they're playing their recycled script, you're already 10 moves ahead. They can't surprise you because their plan isn't new, it's ancient. This is why it looks supernatural when you call their actions before they take them. But it's not magic, it's wisdom. You've watched enough reruns of this same storyline to know exactly how it ends. They think they're unpredictable because the faces have changed, but the script hasn't. You've outgrown the script, and that's why you always know what's coming. Number 3. You read the intent, not the words. What most people don't realize is that words are the cheapest form of camouflage. Anyone can dress up a sentence to sound kind, loyal, or supportive. But intent is harder to disguise. Intent leaks out in subtle ways, through timing, energy, and delivery. You weren't focused on what people said, you were focused on what they actually meant. That's why you always seemed to know the truth before it was revealed. You didn't get distracted by flattery or fooled by well-polished explanations. You tuned into the current running underneath the words. When someone speaks, their intent bleeds through in ways they can't control. A pause that's a second too long, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a compliment that feels more like surveillance than support. You notice these things. Others dismiss them, but you treat them as evidence. You don't need to accuse or confront. You just quietly record the intent that was louder than the words. That's what set you apart. Where others fell for speeches, you read the silence around those speeches. Where others took statements at face value, you weighed the spirit behind them. This made you a step ahead because intent always reveals where someone is going. A person may say, "I wish you the best," but if their energy is laced with bitterness, you already know they're hoping for your downfall. They may say, "I'm here for you," but if their eyes are restless, you already know they're plotting an exit. Their intent betrays them every time, and you learn to trust that betrayal more than the promises they fed you. People hate this about you because it makes them feel naked. They want to believe their words can cover up their true agenda, but you strip them down to what they actually carry inside. They can't lie long enough or convincingly enough because their body language, tone, and spirit keep leaking the truth. You don't call them out every time, but you quietly adjust, already prepared for the action that will eventually match the intent. That's why it seems like you predicted their moves. You didn't need evidence written in ink. Their own intent had already confessed everything to you. Number 4. Their shadows told on them. Their shadows have always been louder than their words. People are masters at polishing their image. They rehearse their smiles, perfect their tone, and even practice the right phrases to sound supportive. But the parts of them they haven't healed, the wounds they haven't faced, and the hunger they're still secretly feeding always leak out in ways they can't control. That's the shadow. It hides in the tension behind a compliment, the flicker of jealousy behind a laugh, the way someone suddenly goes quiet when you win. It's the truth they're trying to suppress, and it always tells on them. You learned to watch not just what people presented, but what slipped through. While others were dazzled by their charm or distracted by their polished performance, you caught the quick eye roll they thought no one saw, the subtle change in energy when your name came up, the too eager interest in things that weren't their business. Those small leaks aren't meaningless. They're the fingerprints of someone's inner world. Their shadow is always looking for a way out, and no matter how much they rehearse their outer persona, the shadow writes its own script. This is why you spotted their hidden hunger long before they even admitted it to themselves. Most people don't consciously know how deep their own envy, insecurity, or desire for control runs. They think they're hiding it well, because they haven't even named it yet. But you could feel it. The unspoken craving for your downfall, the quiet resentment at your growth, the hidden thrill they got from trying to undermine you. You didn't need a confession. Their shadow was the confession. It unsettles people because it's not something they can easily fake. They can disguise their actions for a while, but they can't disguise their reactions forever. And in those small, raw reactions, you saw their truth. That's what gave you the edge. You weren't distracted by the mask. You were reading the cracks. And once you've learned to see someone's shadow, you can predict their moves because you know what's actually driving them. The mask changes, but the shadow stays the same, and that's why you were always 3 steps ahead. Number 5. You understood their limits better than they did. You understood something about people that most never bother to study. Everyone has a limit, a point where their character bends or breaks. It's not just about what they're willing to do. It's about what they're incapable of doing. Some people will never take full accountability. Some will never resist temptation if it's handed to them. Some will always retreat when pressure builds. These limits are like invisible fences around their character. They may not even know those fences are there, but you do. You've watched enough human behavior to see exactly where the line sits for each person, and once you map it, their next move stops being a mystery. While others only see actions, you see thresholds. You notice how far someone is willing to stretch their loyalty, how much discomfort they can tolerate before they betray, how long they can hold a mask before it slips. You don't need to wait for them to show their true colors. You already know which colors will bleed first. That's why you never looked shocked when people switched sides, backed out, or exposed themselves. You saw the limit they were always destined to hit. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Most people make the mistake of assuming others will act the way they would. You never did. You didn't project your own strength or morality onto them. You observed their behavior, their values, their triggers, and you identified the point where they'd fold. That made you impossible to ambush, because you already knew where they'd crack before they even felt the pressure. What unsettles people is that you never reveal you've read them this way. You don't announce, "I know you'll betray me at this point." You simply act accordingly. You protect yourself, you set boundaries, you stay 3 steps ahead. By the time they reach their breaking point, you're already prepared. It looks like foresight, but it's really precision. They might not even know their own limits, but you do, and that's why their path was visible to you long before they started walking it. Number 6, they were loud in their predictability. They thought they were being clever, but every move they made was practically announced with a megaphone. People like that underestimate how transparent their behavior really is. They imagine their jealousy is hidden behind polite smiles, their sabotage buried under helpful gestures, and their competition masked as friendly concern. But to someone who's awake, their actions aren't subtle at all. They're loud, clumsy, and repetitive, the behavioral equivalent of someone trying to sneak into a room while wearing steel boots. Jealousy, competition, and sabotage leave patterns as clear as footprints. It's the same sequence every time: a forced compliment, a sudden shift in energy, an unnecessary advice that undermines rather than supports, a withdrawal when you succeed. They run through the same routine like actors in a play who never learned new lines. That's why you couldn't be surprised anymore. The first time you might have doubted yourself, but by the third or fourth repetition, their script was obvious. This is why it often seemed like you were reading their minds. You weren't. You were simply paying attention to the rhythm they couldn't stop playing. People who operate from insecurity don't innovate, they repeat, and repetition makes them predictable. Once you've seen the pattern of how they react to your wins, your growth, or even your peace, you don't have to guess anymore. You know exactly what's next. What unsettled them most was that you didn't react the way they wanted. Their predictable tactics lose power when the target doesn't respond with confusion or panic. You stayed calm, adjusted silently, and let them walk into the same traps they'd set for you. To them, it felt like you had insider information. In reality, they were the ones giving you all the information with their behavior. Their subtle manipulation was so loud, you could hear it before they even opened their mouths. That's the gift of awareness. It turns their mystery into a routine you've already memorized. Number 7. You saw the hunger that controlled them. You learned early that hunger exposes people more than anything else. It doesn't matter how polished someone looks or how carefully they try to present themselves. When a person is driven by ego, power, or the need for validation, it leaks out of them like a scent. They become predictable because hunger narrows their vision. It makes them reckless. It makes them blind to how obvious they've become. You didn't need to know their entire plan to know their next move. You just had to know what they were hungry for. Ego-driven people always reach for opportunities to be seen. Power-driven people always push for control, even when it costs them credibility. Validation-driven people can't resist applause, even when it exposes their schemes. You saw those cravings before they did, and that gave you an advantage. While they thought they were pulling strings behind the scenes, you were already mapping out the traps they would eventually fall into. Hunger isn't subtle. It's a signal flare. Every decision they made pointed back to the same desire, and that desire always led them to the same mistakes. This is why their behavior felt so easy to read. People controlled by hunger don't weigh consequences the same way. They overextend themselves, overplay their hand, and overestimate their ability to keep the mask on. They tell on themselves through their obsessions. The way they talk about you too much, the way they show up where they shouldn't, the way they chase validation even when it ruins their cover. Once you identified the craving behind the person, you didn't have to guess anymore. You could see their path like a trail of breadcrumbs, and that's what unsettled them. They thought their hunger made them powerful, but it made them transparent. They thought their obsession gave them leverage, but it gave you insight. You didn't just see their actions. You saw the engine running those actions. And once you know the engine, the route becomes obvious. You recognized that the very thing they were addicted to would lead them into their own downfall. And you were right every single time. Number 8, you weren't watching the game, you were watching the player. You never wasted energy trying to outplay the moves on the board because you understood something far deeper. The board doesn't move itself, the person does. Most people get stuck reacting to situations. They're focused on the immediate action, the next small tactic, the visible drama. But you were watching the person behind the moves, the patterns in their thinking, the impulses that shaped their decisions. You weren't studying the chessboard, you were studying the chess player. That's why you were never truly surprised. When you look at the person instead of the game, everything becomes clear. You start to see how their insecurities guide their choices, how their fears make them hesitate, how their ego makes them overreach. Their decisions stop looking random and start looking inevitable. You didn't need to figure out every small detail of what they'd do next. You just needed to understand who they were, because who they are writes their script for them. That's why you were always 10 steps ahead. You weren't reacting to each move like most people. You had already mapped out the inner logic of the player, what drives them, what scares them, what they crave, and what they'll sacrifice to get it. Once you've read that internal blueprint, their choices are no longer a mystery. It's like watching someone pour water downhill. You already know where it's going to end up because gravity never changes. This is the difference between being clever and being aware. Cleverness tries to counter a move. Awareness makes the move irrelevant because you already know the destination. People who operate on impulse or ego don't realize how exposed they are to someone like you. They think they're unpredictable because their tactics change, but their psychology doesn't. And psychology is the real game. So while they were busy plotting against you like they were playing checkers, you had already left the board and were studying the one moving the pieces. That's why you rarely needed to respond with panic or anger. You were already positioned beyond their reach. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't magic. It was your ability to see the human pattern behind the move, and that made you unbeatable. Number 9. Their lies were too perfect. People don't realize that perfection is its own kind of confession. Real life is messy. Truth is rarely polished. When someone's story is too clean, their reactions too rehearsed, or their innocence too overacted, it starts to feel artificial. You picked up on this instinctively. You didn't just listen to what was said. You noticed the unnatural shine on the story, the way it had no rough edges, no inconsistencies, no human hesitation. That kind of smoothness doesn't happen by accident. It's a signal that something has been edited, rehearsed, or carefully constructed to hide what's real. The moment you sensed that over-polish, you knew exactly where to look. Not at what was being presented, but at what was being hidden. The timing of their explanations, the over-the-top denial, the unnecessary details meant to sound believable. All of it was a roadmap pointing away from the truth. They thought they were being clever by creating a flawless illusion. They didn't realize that flawlessness is unnatural and therefore suspicious. That's what gave them away. Most people get fooled by these kinds of performances because they're wired to believe what looks neat and tidy. You weren't. You trusted the grit of reality. You knew that honesty sometimes stumbles, sometimes hesitates, sometimes contradicts itself because it's unplanned. Lies, on the other hand, are desperate to look seamless. That desperation creates cracks in the performance, not visible to everyone, but loud enough for someone like you to catch. This is why you always seemed a step ahead. You didn't accuse right away, but you adjusted your expectations, positioned yourself, and waited. Because you already knew where the truth wasn't. And sure enough, time exposed what you already understood. They were so focused on maintaining their perfect illusion that they overplayed it, making themselves obvious. Perfection became their biggest tell. By trying to appear flawless, they handed you the evidence of their lie before they even spoke it. And that's why they could never truly blindside you. Number 10, you didn't fight to prove them wrong. You let time prove you right. You understood something most people never learn. Time is the ultimate truth teller. You didn't rush to clear your name, argue with liars, or try to expose every plot in real time. You already knew the very nature of manipulation carries a built-in expiration date. People who thrive on deception always think they're smart enough to keep the mask on forever, but arrogance is their weakness. Sooner or later, they overplay their hand. Sooner or later, they slip. And when they do, it's always more powerful than anything you could have said in your own defense. By stepping back, and letting time do its work, you were playing a longer and stronger game. You weren't trying to win arguments, you were letting the truth win. Every manipulator operates on the illusion of control. They believe they can orchestrate outcomes, spin narratives, and shape perception indefinitely. But because they're driven by ego, they push too far. They add one lie too many. They reach for one level of control too high. And that's when their entire scheme collapses under its own weight. Your patience wasn't weakness. It was strategy. You saw their trajectory clearly. A person operating from dishonesty will always create more evidence against themselves than you ever could. They will contradict their own story, alienate their own allies, and show their true motives without any help from you. All you had to do was stay steady and keep your hands clean. Time, not confrontation, became your ally. And when the moment of exposure finally arrived, it hit harder than anything you could have forced. People saw the truth for themselves, without you having to campaign for it. That's why your victories felt effortless to outsiders. They thought you were lucky, but it wasn't luck. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knows that patience is not passive. It's power. You didn't fight to prove them wrong because you knew time would prove you right, and time always does. Number 11. You predicted their moves because they couldn't predict growth. Your ability to stay ahead of them came from one simple truth. You refused to stay who you used to be. While they were busy plotting against the version of you they thought they knew, you were quietly transforming. They built their schemes based on your old habits, your old weaknesses, your old patterns, but you were no longer that person. They were fighting a ghost, a memory, while you were living as someone 3 evolutions ahead. That's why their plans failed before they even started. They weren't planning for you. They were planning for who you used to be. People who operate from manipulation rarely account for growth because they don't grow themselves. They assume you'll stay predictable, stuck, and easy to read. They base their entire strategy on the idea that you'll react the same way you did last time. But transformation breaks patterns. Every time you healed, learned, or leveled up, you rewrote your script. And because you rewrote your script, their predictions lost power. They were trapped in the past. You were already in the future. This is what made it look like you had supernatural foresight. You weren't just anticipating their moves. You were outgrowing the battlefield they were still playing on. They thought you'd fight the same way, panic the same way, or fall for the same traps. But by the time they pulled their tricks, you were already too high up for them to reach. They underestimated what real evolution looks like. It changes your reflexes, your boundaries, your discernment, and even your silence. Their biggest mistake wasn't the plot itself. It was the assumption that you'd never change. They counted on a stagnant target, but you became a moving one. You didn't just dodge their plans, you transcended them. That's why their schemes backfired. Every attempt to outsmart you only revealed how far behind they actually were. They thought they were chasing you, but they were chasing a shadow that no longer existed. That's the hidden power of growth. It makes old attacks obsolete. And by the time they realized you weren't the same person anymore, you had already built a life and a mindset they could no longer touch. Number 12. Their fear spilled before their plan did. You learned to read fear long before it had a chance to hide behind action. People think they can mask their intentions, but fear is harder to contain than anger or envy. It leaks out of the body before the mind can cover it up. It shows in small hesitations, sudden stumbles over words, too many details in a simple explanation, or glances that shift at the wrong moment. Those signs are invisible to most people because they're distracted by what's being said. But you weren't distracted. You watched the signals their fear gave off, and from there you knew exactly what was coming. Fear always precedes action because it's the emotional rehearsal for what someone is about to do. Before a person betrays, they get anxious. Before they attempt sabotage, they over-explain. Before they lie, their body stiffens or their tone changes. It's like the tremor before an earthquake. The nervous system reacts before the plan unfolds. You tuned into that tremor. You didn't wait for the blow to land. You could already sense it being prepared. This ability didn't come from suspicion. It came from experience and awareness. You learned to listen to what wasn't being said, to watch for the awkward pause where confidence should have been, to pick up on the restless energy of someone rehearsing a move in their head. Fear has its own language, and once you learned it, no one could hide from you. They thought their mask was perfect, but their fear had already betrayed them. That's why you always seemed a step ahead. You didn't need evidence on paper because you were reading the evidence in their nervous systems. By the time they made their move, you'd already adjusted, already protected yourself, already positioned beyond the reach of the damage. To them, it looked like you had inside information or some supernatural gift. In reality, their own bodies gave them away. Fear will always outpace deception, and you mastered the art of decoding it. That's how you kept winning without ever needing to fight first, because their fear spilled before their plan did, and you were already ready. Number 13. Their obsession made them obvious. Obsession has a way of unmasking people faster than anything else. When someone becomes fixated on you, your life, your progress, your name, they start losing the ability to hide their true motives. At first, they may act like their interest is casual or their criticism is harmless. But obsession can't stay quiet. It spills over into everything they do. Their comments start sounding like echoes of your achievements. Their moves start centering on your steps instead of their own goals. Even when they try to look uninterested, their timing, their focus, and their patterns give them away. This is the trap of obsession. It strips subtlety. People driven by it think they're working in the shadows, but they're actually leaving a trail of breadcrumbs everywhere. They mention your name too often. They show up where they shouldn't. They copy your ideas, monitor your moves, or insert themselves into your story in ways that don't make sense unless you're their fixation. They believe they're keeping their intentions hidden, but their every attempt to control, sabotage, or mock you is really a confession of how deeply you occupy their mind. You didn't need a spy to know who was plotting against you. Their own obsession revealed them. It's impossible for someone to be subtle when they're consumed with envy or control. They overplay their hand, repeat the same tactics, and make themselves obvious because they can't stop watching, reacting, and reaching. You saw this clearly, which is why you were always 3 steps ahead. You knew their next move, not because you're psychic, but because obsession makes people predictable. The irony is that the more they tried to hurt you, the more they revealed themselves. Their fixation became a spotlight on their own motives. While they were hoping to expose you, they were exposing themselves, and all you had to do was stay steady and watch. They wrote their own confession through their behavior, their timing, their slip-ups, and their unnecessary attention. Their obsession didn't just fail to harm you. It handed you the map to their entire strategy, making them obvious long before they acted. Number 14. You didn't need evidence. You became evidence. You didn't need files, screenshots, or witnesses because your very existence was the undeniable evidence. While they were busy weaving schemes, setting traps, and recycling the same tired tactics, you kept moving, kept growing, and stayed unshaken. That contrast, you steady and evolving, them frantic and repetitive, became the living proof of everything you suspected. Their actions spoke for themselves, and your survival stood as the receipt that exposed the pattern. This is what manipulators never understand. You don't always need to call them out. You don't even have to prove them wrong in the traditional way. When someone's behavior is cyclical, self-revealing, and rooted in the same predictable triggers, they end up proving your point for you. Every plot they tried, every false narrative they spun, every attempt to shake you only confirmed the truth of who they were and the strength of who you had become. Your calm wasn't passivity, it was strategic. It allowed their behavior to unfold, unedited, until their own actions became their testimony. That's the power of becoming the evidence. You're not arguing, you're not defending, you're not scrambling to collect proof. You are the proof. Your peace, your endurance, your refusal to crumble under pressure, your ability to remain consistent while they unravel, all of that tells a story no one can deny. Their patterns were the crime, but your survival, your rise, your composure under fire was the receipt. It showed that everything they tried had failed, and it highlighted their desperation more clearly than words ever could. When you live this way, you move from defense to demonstration. Instead of chasing validation, you let reality do the talking. They became their own witnesses, and you became the exhibit they couldn't explain away. This is why, even without calling them out, you left them exposed. Because the greatest evidence isn't always in documents or recordings. Sometimes it's a living person standing tall, unbroken, and still moving forward while their attackers burn out in their own schemes. That's what you became. A living, breathing, undeniable receipt. From start to finish, you weren't just surviving. You were seeing, understanding, and outpacing every move made against you. While others scrambled to plan, manipulate, and deceive, you were reading patterns, decoding intent, and observing the hidden currents that drive human behavior. You didn't just predict actions. You recognized cycles, mapped limits, sensed hunger, and let time expose truths before anyone else could react. You became the calm in the chaos, the constant they couldn't destabilize, and the living proof that their schemes were never subtle enough to fool someone like you. Every failed attempt, every overplayed move, and every obsessive reaction only confirmed what you already knew. You didn't need to argue, fight, or prove yourself, because your presence, your growth, and your unshakable poise were enough. The more they plotted, the louder their patterns screamed, and the clearer your path became. You didn't just stay ahead, you transcended the game entirely, operating on a level they could neither reach nor comprehend. This is the reality of being a chosen one. You operate not from reaction, but from understanding. You don't need to expose, confront, or even announce your awareness. Your insight, patience, and strategic calm do the work for you. Every attempt to undermine you only illuminates your foresight. Every act of deception only confirms your clarity, and every cycle of their obsession only reinforces your mastery. At the end of the day, you didn't just predict their moves, you became the evidence that they could never outsmart. You didn't just survive the patterns of manipulation, envy, and control, you rose above them. You didn't just endure, you transformed, leaving them exposed while you stood untouchable, unshaken, and evolving beyond their reach. If this message hit you, take it in, own it, share it. Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're uncovering truths that only the chosen ones can truly grasp. This isn't just awareness, it's power. And now the world sees it in you. God bless you.